Today, we're going to talk about oh my goodness, the deeper source of your fatigue. Now, I will say this, I am an expert in this area simply because I've been tired a good portion of my life and I overcame it. So I have something very important I want to share. I remember driving down the street with my wife in my late 20s, being completely exhausted, trying to find a healthy store to find some vitamin to give me energy. It never worked.
I had tons and tons of vitamins and didn't know what was going on.
So if I can teleport this video back in time and show it to myself, this video would have solved my problem if I really understood how the body makes energy. And also, this is going to be very motivating to you, especially because you're going to finally understand what really is behind fatigue in general, because you can take various vitamins and energy drinks and try to boost your energy and more coffee, but that doesn't fix the real problem. And if you go to any of these 7-Elevens, you'll see right at the front counter, this huge section, 5-hour energy drinks. Everything starts with this mitochondria. What is the mitochondria? It's an energy factory deep inside your cells that produces energy. If you have any aspects of fatigue, even if you exercise and you run out of gas really fast, or even if you have many of the different problems, the health problems that most people have, this mitochondria is at the root of it. In fact, most diseases come directly from this mitochondria. So what is the mitochondria? It's a battery making machine, because food directly can't give you energy. It has to be converted into a chemical form of a battery so you can use it. And so the energy battery itself is called ATP. So the mitochondria is actually the battery maker, and the ATP is the actual battery. And whether you took biochemistry or not, this might help you to understand the simplicity of what's going on with the massive complexity of what's happening inside that mitochondria. Maybe you have or you haven't heard about this Krebs cycle thing, right? That's actually the pre-battery maker, okay? So it comes right before the battery maker because the actual battery maker is connected to it.
The Krebs cycle gets everything prepared and ready.
And helps strip out some of these electrons, but we have to somehow extract these electrons from the food that you eat. And since we're on the topic of food, certain foods have more energy than other foods. And so if you're living on ultra-processed foods, it's going to be almost impossible to extract energy from that simply because it's dead. There's not a lot of energy in there. And on top of that, there's a lot of nutritional factors in food that we need that the battery maker assembly line requires. In each step of the assembly line, okay, you need B1, B2, B3, folic acid, B12, magnesium, manganese, selenium, vitamin C, and something else called coenzyme Q10. So these are the helper molecules that are essential for making this battery. Now, there's a very, very important enzyme that's involved in making ATP. It's called ATP synthase. Not that you needed to know that, but what's interesting about this ATP enzyme is that it's very, very tiny, and it's a turbine. It spins. It helps to generate energy, but it's very, very tiny. Okay, so it would take like 100,000 of these little enzymes to be the same width as one hair. Okay, so they're that tiny, but they're spinning at an incredible speed. And every time they rotate one rotation, they produce 3 ATPs. And so how fast do they rotate? Well, they're rotating roughly about 7,000 to 9,000 rotations every single minute. So you can imagine how much ATP is generated. I mean, just one enzyme, you're talking like 27,000 ATPs per minute. Now, if we just look at one cell and determine how many mitochondria is in that one cell, you're looking at, on average, between 1,000 to 2,500 mitochondria per cell. And how many cells do you have in your body? You have 10 trillion cells. Incredible. Now check this out. A healthy person makes a massive amount of ATP. The actual weight of that ATP would be equivalent to your own weight. So if I weigh 180 pounds, I make 180 pounds of ATP every single day. That would be equivalent to 1,200 watts, which comes out to about 282 AA batteries. Now, that might not seem like a lot of wattage, but your body's very efficient at using this energy. But the fascinating thing about this ATP is it's not really stored. It's generated on demand. So if you're not really exercising or moving, you're not going to generate nearly as much as if you were exercising. The point is that this ATP doesn't really get stored. Now, when it's used, okay, it turns into ADP, which then can be recycled back to ATP. And ADP does get stored, but ADP gets recycled about 1,000 times a day, okay, into ATP. And so at any given time during the day, you have really only 1/4 of a kilogram of ATP. That's not that much. But as soon as you start exercising, that ATP generation goes way, way, way up. Now, the next question is, if we don't store ATP, what energy do we store? Well, there's two fuel sources. You have sugar stored as glycogen in your muscle and your liver, which it's not really that much. It's probably have 1,700 calories worth of stored glycogen. And as soon as you deplete it, your body's going to require more sugar or glycogen if you're dependent on that sugar. But you also store energy as fat. And once you're fat adapted, you can tap into this fat a lot easier because you've grooved into this ketosis by lowering your carbohydrates, and you become very efficient at burning fat. And then you can very easily use that fat as energy and have that go through this Krebs cycle. But if you're not fat adapted, you're going to run out of energy pretty quick because you haven't adapted to the fat fuel. You're just going to run out of energy. And so this is why the ketogenic diet is so important for your energy.
First of all, you get more ATP from ketones and fat.
Then you do glycogen or sugar. And secondly, you have a lot of fat reserved to tap into. I mean, the average person who's not overweight has about 100,000 calories of fat on their body compared to the glycogen storage, which is only like 1,700, enough for one day. So with my problem way back when I was in my late 20s, I would consume pure carbohydrates, okay? And my energy would come up when I would eat, and then it would come crashing down because I ran out of energy and I required more sugar or more carbs to get my energy. I was completely dependent on carbs. I didn't know about ketosis back then, but I was always tired, especially in my head. Even when I would wake up in the morning, I would be so tired and I couldn't wake up like mentally until later in the morning or even the midday. So what's significant about that is that 70% of all your ATP is used by your brain. Your brain hogs a lot of this ATP. So if there's not enough of this ATP to go around for various reasons, your brain's going to suffer. And this is why we have so many problems with dementia, ADD, brain degenerative disorders, mood disorders. I mean, try to be depressed when you have a lot of energy available with your mitochondria. It's virtually impossible. If you reflect back on the times that you were depressed, chances are you were also tired at the same time. So the first clue about getting energy is to get on the ketogenic diet. So then you can supply your body with a quick source of fuel, which is more efficient. So you can not only make more ATP, but then so you can tap into this energy reserve a lot quicker and not be stuck with this machine that's only dependent on glucose as your fuel. It's dependent on cofactors.
Yeah, research now has shown that the primary source of oxidative stress in cells is leakage of oxygen and these electrons from the mitochondria. And this leakage increases when the key nutrients or protective molecules are missing, like coenzyme Q10, especially if the person's taking a statin drug or other drugs that deplete that nutrient.
That's a really important nutrient to help transport electrons. Now, it just so happens that that biochemical pathway that involves the coenzyme Q10, which is needed to generate energy, is the same pathway that we make cholesterol. And so the drug statin, which basically inhibits that enzyme, also inhibits coenzyme Q10. And this is why one of the biggest side effects from people taking statins involves muscle problems, weak muscles, inflamed muscles, muscle disorders, lack of energy. Because think about just in general, your muscles need energy to function. I mean, this is how we move. You can't move without muscles. So you can imagine how much mitochondria is in your muscles and how much coenzyme Q10 that we need in our muscles. In fact, if you wanted to consume something with high amounts of coenzyme Q10, you want to eat muscle, okay, like red meat, fish, things like that. And the food that has the highest amount would be organ meats, liver, and especially heart, okay, extract. You can probably get it in supplements, but people don't typically eat heart, but it's something that has a lot of coenzyme Q10. But you have to also realize that your body makes coenzyme Q10, so it's not just necessarily dependent on the diet. You can make it as well if you have all the cofactors that allow it to be generated. And so all those cofactors, especially B vitamins, are needed to allow coenzyme Q10 to work. So just as a side note, if you're on a statin, if you're on a beta blocker, if you're on some medication for diabetes, chances are your coenzyme Q10 is very, very low. So you should start taking that. There's an interesting study that I will put down below about exercise. They tested like athletes versus people who don't exercise, okay? And they gave them coenzyme Q10. So in both groups, they found significant improvement in endurance. So you can go longer without being tired. And now you know why. Because that coenzyme Q10 is necessary in the generation of ATP, as well as acting as an antioxidant to protect you against all this free radical damage that's created from the exercise. So one big side effect from statins too is you just run out of gas really quick, especially if you exert yourself or you exercise. Now, as far as the food that you should be eating, you want food that contains a lot of electrons and a lot of life and a lot of energy, so you can extract the energy from that. If you're consuming like what the average American consumes, processed foods, I think it's 83% of all the calories in the grocery store are ultra processed foods. They don't even resemble the actual food. It's going to be literally impossible to get energy if you're eating those foods. So we want nutrient dense foods.
with red meat at the top of the list.
I will tell you, when I have red meat, I have more energy. It's not just the iron that helps build up my hemoglobin. There's a lot of other factors in that meat that give me energy, not just coenzyme Q10, but just a lot of energy generating factors. There's another interesting study about this. I just found this. I think it's fascinating. I will put the link down below. But what they did is they wanted to test the nutrition factors in red meat, okay, versus the plant-based meats that they're coming up with now, like the artificial meats. And so if you look at the nutrition labels on both of them, they look very similar, right? Look healthy.
But what they found is out of 190 biomarkers, they found 171 out of 190 were significantly higher
Than the plant-based fake meat type food, if you want to call it that. The point is that when you eat nutrient-dense foods, like truly nutrient-dense foods, there's a lot of things in there that can actually help you get healthy. And instead of trying to make food just taste good, I would focus on trying to help grow your food that's more nutrient-dense and eat more food that is nutrient dense. Because what they're trying to do with the fake meat now is just to try to mimic the taste of it, the texture of it. But what about the nutrition? The other really, really, really important thing about your mitochondria and actually producing more mitochondria is exercise. Hands down, that is the number one way to produce more mitochondria. This is another reason why you should consistently exercise on a regular basis. And that's going to override a lot of other bad things that you might have done in your past. And also, if you have any type of diseases or problems currently, this can help counter that. Why? Because
a lot of disease comes from damage to the mitochondria.
And if you're exercising and you're making more and combine that with intermittent fasting, that fasting triggers another thing called autophagy. Autophagy is recycling old damaged proteins, but also the recycling of the mitochondria. How cool is that? And then you're creating new mitochondria. This is how you're going to get more energy. This is the stuff that I wish I knew back in my early 20s. Actually, before that, I wish I knew this in kindergarten. I would have saved myself a lot of years of fatigue. Now, a couple other things that can increase your mitochondria. Cold therapy. I do that on a regular basis, and man, do I feel better after doing it. If you're a little hesitant of doing that, you can do kind of like a partial cold immersion with a cold shower. The most difficult part about this is when you submerge around your heart, because your heart is pumping and it's trying to keep you warm, and it's kind of like the most vulnerable area. But you can always do half of your body cold and you'll get some benefits from that. There's also phytonutrients that can increase the reproduction of mitochondria and actually help repair some of the mitochondria as well, like sulforaphane in the cruciferous vegetables and the broccoli microgreens, as well as the radish microgreens. It's in a lot of different foods. There actually are quite a few phytonutrients that when you consume those, they help your mitochondria. And then on the flip side, it's avoiding certain things too, like avoiding the refined foods, avoiding the sugar, going on keto, avoiding chronic stress, heavy metals, smoking, alcohol. These are all the things I wish I would have known back in my 20s. And also this understanding of what the mitochondria really is.
Now, because of the censoring and the suppressing of the algorithms on YouTube, it's becoming more difficult to find my content. And there's a lot of content that I cannot put on YouTube, unfortunately. So to make sure you have full access of all my information, go to drberg.com and subscribe to my newsletter by clicking the link down below in the description. I will see you on the other side.
Now, since I touched on this coenzyme Q10 thing, if you haven't seen this video, check it out. It's pretty interesting.